Suddenly red bloomed across my wife's face. In a rage, I had taught the woman a lesson in respect. Far too long had she not known how to listen. By now, she ought to have learned better. All of my blokes at work, their wives had known their place, but no, not mine. I had to get a wife who was difficult.
I'm sorry. I only meant that I had noticed that you'd been coming home late. I simply feared you were having problems at work.
She wailed. Anger blossomed in my stomach. Her tears were nauseating, trying to win my sympathy in this childish manner. Her face was ugly with her strife. As she pleaded for my affection, the wench grabbed me and I yanked myself away.
Stop this nonsense. You wonder why I wish to stay away from this place? You hound me day and night for some sort of affection, but you do not earn it.
I spit the words like acid on my tongue. She was a sniveling mess, a disgrace to what a woman ought to be.
I can't be around you. You do this to yourself.
I turned abruptly away from her. The house we shared together only drained me after working long days at Parliament.
She wonders why I leave for hours at a time, and yet it's entirely her fault.
I thought.
She pesters me with her petty feminine problems and insecurities that I care not for.
As I left the house, I slammed the door behind me, and I could only imagine her oncoming breakdown. I couldn't have cared less. It was a cool, foggy London evening, refreshing compared to the heat of my fury. I tried to leave the baggage behind me as I headed toward the local pub. I can always rely on finding a young woman to relieve my stress with. I pounded my way down the street, the fire of my anger lighting my path behind me. As I approached the small pub, a group of men sat drinking and laughing.
We've all seen it in the paper, but what are they really doing to protect us? We all have families to take care of, so what am I supposed to do when me wife is on me back?
One says.
Now, you got a point there, mate. There's been 6 already in the past 2 weeks. I don't feel good walking the streets with a killer like that on and about.
His mate adds.
What I was wondering is why it's only us blokes that are getting killed. Never hear news of a lady being taken these days.
He elbowed his nearest friend.
Might need to change that if you know what I mean.
He started howling in laughter. His friends started laughing with him, and I let myself chuckle at the remark. It was strange, though. London had seen more murders these past couple of weeks than usual, and they were all found with the same cause of death. Strangled until their neck was mangled. Not something an ordinary person could do. It would require an absurd amount of strength, one that is not physically possible without a tool. It was worrying, but then again, it's not something that I care about. I strode down the cobblestone street, turning into the pub I would frequent when my wife was being especially grating. It smelled of soured beer and was almost stiflingly hot. I stopped abruptly just before the pub.
Oh, Monty's, my second home.
I mumbled to myself. Oh, Monty's was a brick building caked with mold and grime. I examined the red and yellow awning that hung over the door. Large yellow stained windows flanked the wooden floor. Just from peering through the window, anyone could sense that nothing but trouble could come from walking into that pub. Monty's had a full bar with 20 stools all lined up. The stools were tattered and some were even missing a leg. To the left of the bar were wooden booths, stationed in the corner of the tavern. Each booth had a candle placed in the center. Unfortunately, the candles did nothing to vanquish the suffocating darkness that enveloped the interior. As I entered the place, I made it a beeline for the bar.
What'll you be having today, sir?
The usual barkeep Richard asked.
The usual, and make it strong.
I sighed as I laid my method of payment on the bar.
Right away, sir.
Richard replied with a disinterested tone. As I waited on my drink, I spun around on my stool so I could observe the people in the pub, laughing without a care in the world. My eyes landed on a woman in the furthest corner of the space. Her red hair was striking. I took it upon myself to approach her. I had found my victim. As I began to walk up to her, she glanced up as if she could sense my stare. Her gleaming green eyes captivated me and left me frozen in my tracks. Her fiery red hair complemented the emerald green gem that was embroidered into her deep crimson gown. Those ruby red curls fell just above her waist. A tight black corset cinched her waist beyond what I thought was humanly possible. Her beautiful red lips curved into an innocent smile. Her long lashes looked me up and down. I could tell that she liked what she saw. Her breathtaking beauty almost left me speechless. Thankfully, I am scarcely left without something to say. Richard cleared his throat to grab my attention.
Sir, your drink's ready.
He left my scotch at the bar, and I reached for it, took a swig, and sauntered over to the young woman's table.
Miss, it's awfully late to be out on your own.
I smirked at her. Her green eyes met mine. Her gaze was piercing.
Well, I shouldn't need to be frightened when someone like you is around.
She batted her eyelashes at me and scooted away.
Would you care to join me?
I would love nothing more.
I responded, taking the open seat next to the woman.
Why is it that I've never seen you before?
I questioned, leaning in with a winning smile. She grins in return.
Maybe I'm just not memorable.
I find it difficult to believe that I wouldn't recall a figure such as yours.
I complimented. She pauses, leaning back with an appraising look, and begins to smile slowly. I felt more than confident that she would be coming back with me that night. We continued to sit and talk for over an hour. Though I never caught her name, I wouldn't need it, nor would she need mine.
I have a place we can go for tonight. I own a room at the inn downtown.
I offered. She smiled at me.
That sounds perfect, but I must ask, I've noticed a ring on your left hand. That wouldn't happen to be a wedding band, would it?
She asked in a shockingly playful tone.
You don't mind, do you? I don't like her much anymore. She's been more of a nuisance at this point. Constantly whining and nagging me. You really need not worry.
If you insist.
She replied as we began our walk to the inn, chatting merrily on the way. We soon arrived at the door, and as I entered, the owner threw my key at me and I caught it with ease. We proceeded down the hall, and tension gripped my shoulders. She walked into the room. I closed and locked the door behind us. No one would interrupt us. I needed this. As I turned to face her, she began to approach me, grinning from ear to ear. It was almost sinister, but I chose to ignore my growing unease. Before I could blink, she had gripped my throat with her bare hands, something that should not have been possible. Pain burst forth from my neck, and yet all I could focus on were her bright green eyes. They tore through me, forcing my attention not on my demise, but on her face. I could feel my breath coming short and my throat closing. I clawed at her dainty hands that should not have the strength to handle me this way, yet I did not have the will necessary to fight her off. I croaked out one last word that I could muster.
Why?
She gripped me harder, and I could feel my bones cracking, the last shred of life leaving me. She simply replied,
You do this to yourself.
The woman dropped the lifeless form onto the carpeted floor of the sinful room. She looked down in disdain. A pity, really, that such a life could be wasted this way. Yet he had hurt so many with his wretched, futile life. His choices had brought nothing more than pain and misery, and she had ended the monster that could bring them about. Still, there was more work to be done. There would always be more work to be done. She turned toward the door and left the distasteful place, a graceful glide, to her next target. The man who worked the front desk threw her a smirk.
Finished already, eh?
No words came to her mouth. She simply handed the key, signature smile on her lips. His face twisted with confusion, but there was no time for questioning, for she was already gone. She had left to continue her eternal mission.
200 years later.
Loud bass comes from inside the large frat house, bodies against bodies in a sweaty dance of sensuality. Red plastic cups scatter over a lawn. A calm smile creeps across her silky cheeks.
I almost expected this to be difficult.
She thought. Pulling up the strapless dress and fastening her curls with an extra pin, she emerges from the fog with an air of calmness and eerie confidence. As she approaches the house, a couple stumbles out, smelling of beer and sweat. She steps back into the fog, concealing her form.
Stop, Julian, I have to go home.
The girl mumbles into the man's shirt. Smiling, he ignores her and continues dragging her behind him by the arm. The girl has emerged from the house, smiling and laughing, but she wasn't smiling anymore.
Julian, I'm serious. I have a curfew. My parents are going to kill me if I'm not home.
Julian, the woman observes, does not care in the slightest. He had only one thing on his mind, and he wasn't leaving until he got what he wanted. She has found her victim, and she hadn't even needed to enter the frat house. The girl's playful resistance began to turn into a growing panic.
Julian, stop.
The girl says this with panic in her voice, attempting to yank her arm away. The woman observes the struggle for only moments before she resolves to intervene. As she approaches the pair, the young girl's eyes widen.
You should leave.
The woman says with a soft smile. The boy whips around to look at the woman with anger. Before he can utter even a syllable, she has gripped him by the throat. With only a hand, and begins to compress his trachea with deliberate slowness. The girl screams in horror, but doesn't move to stop the woman. She is terrified. The sounds of the boy's strangled cries and his increasingly reddening face brought the woman a familiar comfort.
This is what I live for, what I crave.
These moments always reminded her of why she did what she did, and why she loved it. She craved the feeling deep in her cold black soul. In his last seconds of consciousness before the eternal darkness comes, she grins at him with glee.
You won't be missed.
With one final squeeze, his trachea snaps, and he falls to the ground. The woman turns to the girl's face in horror and turns away wordlessly, vanishing into the fog. As the world moves on, grows, changes, ages, she never does. The woman's work is never finished. The woman will remain forever.